Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Intro to a Better Tech Economy webinar. We're going to give it just a couple of minutes as we wait for late arrivals. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat if you'd like. We'll get started shortly. And I'll keep repeating this message a couple of times as we wait for the room to fill. Hello, thank you for those of you that are just joining us. We're going to get started in just about a minute or two. We're just waiting for the room to fill. Feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat if you'd like. Grab some water. We'll get started shortly. I'll keep repeating this message a couple of times. We're just waiting for the room to fill, so as people are coming in. Welcome to those of you just joining us. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for the room to fill. Give it about one more minute and we'll get started. Cool. I think we have everyone in. Let's see, chat. Everyone. Cool, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our Intro to a Better Tech Economy webinar. I hope you all can hear and see me. My name is Calderon. I'm the community manager at TechEquity Collaborative. And in my role, I get to engage with our supporters through our organizing efforts, through events such as these, and I get to engage with you all here. So feel free to drop in any questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. But we won't answer any of those questions until the end. And I do want to say that the webinar is being recorded. We'll be sending out a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slides in an email afterwards. So in case you miss anything, in case you want to share the webinar, that will be in your inboxes shortly after. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, today we're going to be covering, some of these tensions that our communities have had with tech. We'll talk about, bad policy choices that have predated tech's arrival. We'll talk a little bit about how tech equity fits in to help combat some of these issues. And we'll talk about solutions that we've identified that can help support to ensure that, this tech economy that we're currently in works for everyone. So the tensions with tech, as many of you know, communities, are frustrated with tech, and it really comes to no surprise, but we've seen that when tech is, shouldering the blame for a lot of these inequities, it starts to create this us versus them dynamic, that's further dividing and splitting communities apart. I know for myself, I've grown up in the Bay Area my whole life here in California, and I've been able to witness this firsthand. I have friends and family who are, worried about the changes they're seeing in their neighborhoods, what that means for their jobs, what that means for their home security, but also friends and family who are pursuing jobs within the tech industry and are finding, lots of success for themselves and for their families alike. And unfortunately, as the tech sector continues to expand, especially as it's been accelerated by remote work the last couple of years, into other cities across the country, we're seeing that many of the inequities that we're experiencing in the Bay Area are beginning to replicate elsewhere. But, how do we get here? Well, we know that tech didn't start this level of pain that our communities has been facing for years. These inequities have been in our economy and society for decades, even when Silicon Valley here in California was still farmland. And all these feelings of frustration are understandable, and there's no doubt that tech has exacerbated inequality, but tech didn't start, all of these issues. And over the last couple of decades, there really has been this overall shift in the balance of power that has hindered communities' abilities to prosper and to survive. And that shift of power has really benefited corporations. While the government was cutting back on social programs, they were simultaneously cutting taxes for larger corporations in the 80s, and individual tax rates have been following, the same trajectory over the last couple of decades, and that's that blue line on the top of the chart. But we see that corporate taxes, have been declining throughout the years, and that's that gold line on the bottom. And just to put this shift in power into perspective, in 2019, 49% of our tax revenue around $626 billion was collected from individuals, people like me, yourself, people on this call, while only 5%, $59 billion came from corporations. And these tax cuts and increases in profits for companies has really come at the expense of workers and workers' voice. Corporations have this long history of suppressing worker power and worker voice, and there are numerous accounts of union busting and strategic attacks on worker-centered organizations that are only reinforcing this profit over people approach and reinforcing this shift in power. And corporations have begun to flex this shift in power by, entering communities, buying up apartments and homes in an effort to maximize profits. And we're seeing corporations' bad practices as new landlords through, some issues that we've been seeing, like inaccurate background checks, predatory ownership schemes, and exclusionary lending. And it really has begun to reinforce exclusionary housing practices of the past, for things like we've heard about already, like redlining. If you're not too familiar with redlining, in the 1930s, predating tech's arrival, right, way decades ago, the federal government instituted a policy that's still felt today, especially within communities of color and in the Bay Area, in California, all across the country. And that policy is redlining. Redlining was a process in which the Homeowners Loan Corporation, a federal agency at the time, gave neighborhoods these ratings to guide investment. And the policy is named for the red or hazardous neighborhoods that were deemed riskiest. So on maps, those neighborhoods were literally redlined. As you can see with the image of the screen, the map on the left side is a map of Seattle. It's a tech city. And all those red blocks you're seeing on the left map are all examples of historically redlined neighborhoods. And those communities that were deemed risky for investment didn't receive any investment at all. And these neighborhoods were predominantly home to communities of color. And that really is by no accident. The hazardous ratings were in large part based on racial demographics. So in other words, redlining was a discriminatory policy and a racist policy, and it made it hard for residents to get loans for things like home ownership or maintenance of their homes, for something like building a new roof. And consequently, redlining led to cycles of disinvestment, including development and production within these neighborhoods. And there's a terrible history of underinvestment, underbuilding, and exclusion in our country. And often those communities that have been historically underinvested in and have been redlined are the very same communities that are at risk of gentrification today. And on top of these exclusionary policies, it's simply just too expensive to build affordable homes in our country today. If we want to give an example, in San Francisco, it costs about $1.2 million to build one unit of housing. And even if more housing does get built, tenants are not being protected enough to be able to remain in their homes. We've seen that eviction rates and displacement continues to increase heavily over the years, and families have been pushed into the outer edges of major cities, further away from job centers of resources. And in New York, for example, as we can see with the stat on the screen, weakened tenant laws have drastically led to a decrease in homes available for people. And evictions are not just happening in expensive areas like San Francisco and New York, but also in up and coming tech cities like Atlanta. And eviction rates, across the country are continuing to push our most vulnerable community members away. And on top of tenants having little to no power in order to combat these evictions, they're also lacking power in their jobs. As we can see here, the hourly pay for workers has not really increased much in the last couple of decades, even though the productivity of corporations has dramatically increased. According to the Economic Policy Institute, the share of workers covered by a collective bargaining agreement or unions, dropped from 27% to 11.6% between 1979 and 2019, meaning that the union coverage rate is now less than half where it was 40 years ago. And so what does this really mean? Well, it means that employees have less bargaining power to advocate for pay rates in alignment with the work that they're delivering. And not having this ability to speak up and address worker injustices have led to constant disturbing stories we're hearing about worker conditions. We're hearing these disturbing workplace practices that are putting workers at risk, both physically and mentally. And it's not just within the tech industry, it's, across the board. For decades, we have rail workers, we have nurses, but we also have people in Amazon warehouses, people working at Facebook, etc. And a lot of the times, the workers that are the most impacted are contract workers or people performing what's known as ghost work. So ghost work is a term that's used to describe the kind of work that feels like it's being automated, but it's really not. It has somebody behind the scenes, performing these tasks. And a good example of that is content moderation. Contracted workers and ghost workers, they're crucial to the tech industry as they're providing, cheaper labor, but they don't share the same benefits as their full-time employees. And it's a little out of context that, the tech industry came to power and cemented itself as the engine of our current economy. The tech industry position as arguably the most powerful sector of American business requires that they do take some responsibility for how the economy has grown and how it's growing. And in addition, tech has to employ some business practices or create products that are directly impacting the economic health of our communities. If we look at the top companies in our economy today, tech does own a lot of the market share. So we do see some familiar faces up there: Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon. And like we've talked about, tech didn't create this social and economic inequity in the US, but it has had a role in worsening inequity, and it does have a responsibility to help fix it. At TechEquity, our community of tech workers, activists, community members, advocates, have the civic power to help rebalance the shift in power as we've been talking about within and outside the tech industry. And at TechEquity, we've identified and uncovered these overlooked issues of inequity. So, if you do decide to, hop on and engage with us, you can champion for some of these solutions in the future. So how does tech equity work? How do we fit into the conversation of the shift in power of the tech industry and of tech's role? So our goal at Tech Equity is to change the conditions in which the tech sector is growing. We believe that effective structural change will eliminate a culture and policies that have institutionalized inequity, leading to stronger and more resilient communities. And we help our community approach these big problems and engage in system change in three major ways. So our programs, educate you about the most critical civic issues where you live. And we do this in a variety of ways. We host panel discussions with experts. We produce voter guides, blogs. We have book club discussions, really just a variety of ways for people to be able to, get new information about, what's going on in the world. We advocate for public policy that's rebalancing power and builds economic equity. And a perfect example of this is the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, in which we worked with a group of legislative stakeholders, people on the ground, renters to, really get behind a bill that now, the bill did get passed, but now protects 8 million California renters by preventing them from unjust evictions and price gouging of rents. And finally, there's corporate practice, aiming to turn companies into agents of equity in the broader community. And we do this through corporate partnerships and engagements with companies. So this year's, key initiatives, begin with the Contract Worker Disparity Project. This is really a first of its kind worker-centered initiative that's shedding the light on the practice of contracting out, as we talked about earlier with contracted work, and proposes and advocates for public policy solutions and partners with companies to adopt responsible contracting practices. We also have the Tech Bias in Housing Initiative, examining the promises and perils of housing technology, and we aim to ensure that the technological innovations in the housing space do not reinforce the racist housing systems and policies of the past. And finally, we have the Housing Data Initiative. So passing good policy is meaningless if those policies aren't implemented well. Together with our coalition of partners and government officials, we identify where tech can be a lever for smart policy implementation, and we enlist workers, to build some of the tools that move us from talk to action. So, what are the issues that we're seeing within tech and as a result of tech that we can address? Well, within the tech sector, we're seeing that there's large disparities emerging between headquarters, warehouse, contracted workers, and temporary contract and contingent workers, who are hired through contracting agencies, are often doing the same work as their directly employed peers, but are making less money, receiving fewer benefits, and experiencing career immobility. So at TechEquity, we've done research on this issue. It's known as the Contract Worker Disparity Project, and I'll include a link of that in the follow-up email, but it helped uncover some of these issues that this workforce within the tech industry has been experiencing. At the same time, the tech industry has an imperative to make its employee base more representative of the population at large, not just to create broader economic opportunity, but because companies with diverse representation at all levels are more likely to be successful than those that aren't. And so, at TechEquity, we worked this last year on the Pay Transparency for Pay Equity Act, also known as SB 1162, which was signed into law to help start addressing some of these inequities that we're seeing within the workforce. And there's also, inequities, as a result of tech that we can help address. Tech has produced a lot of wealth, but that wealth has exacerbated our communities. We have seen, people have been displaced, homes are becoming unaffordable, more and more expensive for renters and for people who are trying to purchase homes as well. And we can repurpose, some of this wealth to strengthen tenant protections, produce more affordable housing, and help communities organize around policies that change the ownership structure back into the hands of the people instead of corporations. And we've tackled some of these issues through our work on Prop 13 reform through our Schools and Communities First campaign. If you are interested in a little bit to hear more about Prop 13, I'll also be including a link into what that work consisted of in the follow-up email. We also have the impact, of civic tech tools. Prop tech is accelerating the corporate takeover of single family starter homes and renting at a mass scale. And these new companies are often, venture backed, digitally enabled, and they play an increasingly influential role in the economy. And from new modes of housing construction to automated buying, these tech-enabled companies are promising to scale to massive market share and reap higher valuations along the way. So we have to be thoughtful about how we can work together with companies to ensure that they don't reinforce the biases in their products. And we're working on this already through our Tech Bias in Housing initiative. We're also building tools, visualizations, and apps that are supporting the movement for economic justice. At TechEquity, we do have a team of volunteer researchers, designers, coders, really anyone with a technical background to collaborate on tough problems and share new skills. And just as an example, we've had volunteers in the past help us build out a website where renters can use it to find out if their landlord's rent increase was illegal and how to get help. That website is called tenantprotections.org. It's live. It was built by volunteers, and it's already been used by thousands of California renters. And so what can you do today? Well, you can, like I said, sign up to become a civic tech volunteer. If you have that technical background and you want to work on a project, you can, engage in our network, tell your friends about us. The more people within the industry, within our communities that know that this organization exists, that we're advocating for a better tech economy that works for everyone, the more we're able to help pass better policy solutions to address these issues. You can contribute to the organization, or you can join me for a one-on-one conversation. I do offer direct phone call, a Zoom call with our network to in case you have any questions, if you want to talk about your journey here at TechEquity, or if you just want to, see how you fit in, how your skills fit in, and, what you can do. We also host tons of events throughout the year. So if you want to check out, some of our past events, all the recordings are available on our website. So you can check us out for our next event. So I'm sure that was quite a bit of information to absorb. So if you have any questions, keep an eye out on the Q&A function for about a minute or two. Like I said, we'll be sending out a follow-up email after this with a link to the recording and a link to the slides. You can also reply to that follow-up email if you do have a question, and I can answer it later. So I'll just take a minute real quick, see if anyone has any questions. Okay, I'm not seeing anything coming through. It's totally fine. No worries. Like I said, you can also reply to the follow-up email if you have any questions. I want to thank everyone for your time. We hope you feel inspired to join our growing movement. If you're still a little bit confused as to like how you can fit in to the organization, how'd you like to participate, I'd really encourage you all to reply to that follow-up email and schedule a one-on-one call with me, and I can point you in the right direction. Yeah, if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to reply to that email. Hope to see you in the future at a future event as a volunteer, and enjoy the rest of your weekends, everyone. Thank you. Bye, y'all.